Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
When Kyle first called and asked if he could crash at my place for a few days, I didn't even hesitate before saying yes, because no matter how frustrating he could be, no matter how many times he had screwed up in the past, he was still my brother. And I figured a little kindness wouldn't kill me. He had just lost his apartment after his roommate bailed on rent, and he needed some time to figure things out, find a new place, get back on his feet, and start fresh. I told myself it wouldn't be a big deal, that I could tolerate him for a few nights, that family was supposed to help each other when things got tough. But by month 6, after watching him turn my living room into his personal kingdom of laziness, I was this close to committing a crime. The first few days weren't bad, mostly because I still believed he was actually going to leave. He dumped his duffel bag in the corner of my guest room, promised he wouldn't be in my way, and assured me he'd be out before I even noticed he was there. I even made him dinner the first night, let him borrow my spare phone charger, and told myself I was doing a good thing, being a supportive sibling, proving I wasn't some cold-hearted monster. But by the end of the first week, things had already started to shift, and I was beginning to realize that Kyle's definition of temporary was a little different from mine. He started spreading out, like an invasive species slowly taking over its surroundings, leaving his clothes in the living room, stacking his empty soda cans on my coffee table, tossing his shoes wherever he felt like it instead of by the door where they belonged. His laptop charger stayed plugged into the outlet next to the couch, his car keys were constantly thrown onto my kitchen counter, and somehow, without even discussing it, my home had become his home, but with none of the responsibilities that came with actually living there. By the time we hit the 1-month mark, Kyle had settled in so comfortably that you'd think he was paying half the mortgage instead of absolutely nothing. He had stopped asking before taking food from the fridge, had started using my bathroom like it was his personal spa, and had even begun inviting friends over without warning, treating my place like it was some kind of frat house that I just happened to be renting space in. The worst part? He never once brought up the idea of looking for a new apartment, never mentioned moving out, never even acknowledged that his few days had already stretched into something long past reasonable. I tried being nice at first, because I didn't want to be that sister, the one who was too harsh, the one who didn't understand what it was like to struggle, the one who didn't give her own flesh and blood a little grace. So I dropped hints, casually mentioning apartments I had seen for rent nearby, forwarding job listings to his email, making offhand comments about how long he'd been staying with me. But every time, Kyle had an excuse, some long-winded explanation about how things just weren't lining up yet, how the job market was terrible, how he was so close to getting something stable but just needed a little more time. By month 3, I knew I had made a huge mistake, but by then, it was already too late. Kyle had settled in so deeply that he wasn't just a guest anymore, he was a full-blown squatter who had no intention of ever leaving. He had taken over the couch as if it was his throne, left dirty dishes in the sink as if I was his maid, and started using my expensive shampoo and skincare products without asking, like I was running some kind of 5-star luxury hotel with free amenities. When I asked him to contribute to rent, he laughed, actually laughed, like I had told him the funniest joke in the world, before brushing me off with some vague promise about paying me back once things stabilized. By month 4, I had officially lost it. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of him blasting his music from my living room, sprawled across the couch, scrolling on his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. He never cleaned, never cooked, never lifted a damn finger to help with anything, and yet he had the nerve to act like I was overreacting every time I brought up the fact that he was still here, still freeloading, still making my life hell. By month 5, I had stopped being polite. I started making it very clear that I wanted him gone, setting deadlines, having real conversations, laying out exactly what needed to happen for him to get out of my house. And every single time, Kyle found a way to weasel out of it, pulling the "I'm your brother" card, the "I don't have anywhere else to go" excuse, the "but we're family, you wouldn't actually kick me out" manipulation that made my blood boil. By month 6, I snapped. I had been working late, exhausted from an already brutal week, counting down the minutes until I could finally go home and have some peace and quiet, but the moment I walked through the door, I knew something was off. The place reeked of beer, the lights were dimmed, and my living room was packed with random people I had never met before, laughing, drinking, making themselves at home in an apartment I was paying for. And there, in the middle of the chaos, was Kyle, acting like the king of the castle, grinning as he clinked bottles with some guy who looked like he hadn't showered in a week, completely oblivious to the rage boiling in my veins. I didn't say a word, didn't yell, didn't explode right there in front of his pathetic little audience. Instead, I turned, walked into my kitchen, and opened my fridge, hoping and praying that there was still something left for me to eat after a long day. But of course, there wasn't. Kyle had eaten the last of my food. Again. And that was it. That was the final straw, the breaking point, the moment I knew I had to get rid of him no matter what it took. Because Kyle had pushed me too far, and he had no idea what was coming next. I had always known my brother was the type of person who could talk his way out of almost anything, the kind of guy who had been coasting through life on charm, excuses, and the unwavering belief that no matter how badly he screwed up, someone else would always be there to pick up the pieces. But until he moved into my apartment and started treating it like his own personal all-inclusive resort, I had never truly realized just how far he was willing to push things if he thought he could get away with it. The first time I tried to bring up the subject of rent, I was careful, polite even, approaching it the way you would with a normal adult, someone who understands that living somewhere comes with responsibilities, that nothing in life is free. That basic human decency means paying your share when you've been living off someone else for months. I sat down across from him one evening, waited until he had finished his latest overly dramatic rant about how the job market was impossible to break into, and calmly told him that it was time for him to start contributing financially, even if it was just a small amount to help with groceries or utilities. His reaction was immediate, exaggerated, downright theatrical, as if I had just asked him to donate a kidney instead of kicking in for the water bill. He leaned back on my couch, the one he had basically claimed as his own at this point, dragged a hand down his face, and let out the longest, most dramatic sigh I had ever heard. "Jess," he groaned, shaking his head. "I swear, I was literally about to get back to you on that. I just need a little more time, you know? I've been applying to jobs nonstop. It's just these companies, man, they're so slow at responding." I stared at him, unimpressed, waiting for something, anything, that resembled actual accountability, but instead, he just launched into another one of his well-rehearsed excuses, spinning some elaborate tale about how he had this amazing opportunity lined up, how he was this close to landing a job that was going to completely turn things around, how the only reason he hadn't been hired yet was because companies were being weird about hiring right now. I had heard it all before. Every week, it was the same story, just with slight variations depending on the situation. If I asked about rent, he would swear he was about to Venmo me next week. But, shockingly, next week never came. If I brought up moving out, he would shake his head and say something about how he just needed one solid paycheck before he could afford a deposit on a place, but that paycheck never appeared. If I told him he needed to step up and actually do something to help out around the apartment, he would pull out his favorite guilt trip, the "but we're family" card, as if that somehow excused him from acting like a responsible adult. At first, I actually tried to believe him, convince myself that maybe, just maybe, he really was trying, that he really was struggling to catch a break, that it wasn't entirely his fault that things weren't working out for him. But after weeks turned into months and nothing changed, it became painfully obvious that Kyle wasn't struggling. He was just lazy, entitled, and completely content to live off me for as long as I let him. And the worst part? He didn't just refuse to contribute financially, he also refused to respect any of my boundaries. He treated my apartment like his personal bachelor pad, inviting his friends over whenever he felt like it, blasting music late at night when he knew I had work in the morning, leaving beer cans on the coffee table, eating my food without asking, using my stuff like it was his own, and generally acting like I should be grateful that he was even gracing my home with his presence. It got to the point where I had to vent to my friends just to stay sane, and every single one of them told me the same thing, that Kyle was a freeloader, a leech, a grown man who needed to get his act together, and that I needed to kick him out before he completely took over my life. I knew they were right. I knew, deep down, that Kyle had no intention of ever moving out, that he was just going to keep manipulating me into letting him stay as long as he could get away with it. But every time I tried to work up the nerve to put my foot down and really force the issue, he would pull some new excuse out of his back pocket, some half-hearted promise that he was working on it, some reminder that family is supposed to help each other, some long-winded speech about how it was just temporary and how I was being unfair for acting like he was some kind of deadbeat. And for a while, I let him get away with it. Until one night, when I went to grab my expensive skincare from my bathroom only to realize it was missing. I searched through my cabinets, checked under the sink, convinced myself that I had just misplaced it somehow, that I wasn't actually losing my mind. But after 5 minutes of turning my bathroom upside down, I still couldn't find it. Then, like a sick realization slowly creeping in, I thought about Kyle. I walked down the hall to the guest bathroom, the one he had completely taken over since moving in, and pushed open the door, not even bothering to knock, not caring if he got mad about it. And there, sitting right on the edge of his sink, was my ridiculously expensive moisturizer, my high-end face serum, my luxury shampoo that I only used on special occasions. He had been using my stuff behind my back. Not just borrowing. Not just asking to try it out. Straight up using it like it was his own personal product line, like I was his damn sugar mama providing him with a free skincare routine. I stood there for a moment, staring at the bottles lined up on his sink, listening to the sound of my own patience finally snapping, feeling something deep inside me shift into a dangerous, slow-burning kind of rage. Kyle had been pushing my limits for months, but this was the beginning of the end. I had spent the last 6 months convincing myself that Kyle would eventually get his act together, that maybe if I was just patient enough, firm enough, understanding enough, he would wake up one day and realize that he couldn't keep freeloading off me forever. I had given him every chance to prove that he was making an effort, that he wasn't just using me as a free place to crash while he figured out his next excuse. But no matter how many conversations we had, no matter how many deadlines I set, no matter how much I begged, reasoned, or flat out demanded that he take responsibility for his own life, nothing changed. And after what I walked into that night, after the absolute disaster that greeted me when I stepped through my front door, I knew, without a doubt, that Kyle had no intention of ever leaving unless I forced him out myself. It had already been a terrible day at work, the kind where everything went wrong, where every customer seemed extra difficult, where my boss dumped last-minute tasks on my plate as if I didn't already have enough on my mind, where all I wanted was to come home, take a hot shower, eat something that didn't come out of a microwave, and enjoy a single moment of peace in my own damn home. But the moment I opened my front door, the moment I was hit with the overwhelming stench of beer, sweat, and something that smelled suspiciously like cheap weed, I knew immediately that any hope of a relaxing evening was completely destroyed. The living room was an absolute disaster. Beer bottles and fast food wrappers littered the floor, my coffee table was covered in sticky, half-empty drinks, and my couch, my expensive, brand-new couch, was occupied by 3 strangers I had never seen before. Completely passed out, their shoes still on, their presence in my home so outrageously disrespectful that I felt my entire body tense with rage. The TV was still on, the volume low but the screen frozen on some ridiculous late-night comedy show, the sound of distant laughter from what I could only assume were more unwanted guests coming from down the hall. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my gaze landed on my favorite floor lamp, the one I had spent weeks saving up for, the one I had specifically chosen to match my decor, the one that made my apartment feel like a home, and saw that it was lying on its side, the bulb shattered, the stand bent at an awkward, irreparable angle. I had seen enough. I stormed through the apartment, my heart pounding, my fists clenched, my pulse roaring in my ears as I shoved open Kyle's bedroom door without bothering to knock, ready to end this once and for all. And there he was, sitting on my bed, leaning against the pillows like he didn't have a care in the world, laughing at something on his phone, one hand lazily holding a half-eaten slice of pizza, completely unfazed by the disaster happening just outside his door. I didn't even try to hold back. "What the actual hell, Kyle?" I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut through the haze of his obliviousness, my entire body shaking with a mix of rage, exhaustion, and the undeniable realization that I had let this go on for far too long. Kyle blinked up at me, clearly annoyed that I had interrupted whatever stupid video he was watching, chewing lazily on his pizza like he hadn't just completely trashed my home, like this was normal, like I should have expected it, like I should just deal with it because it was inconvenient for him to care. "Oh, chill out, Jess," he groaned, rolling his eyes, wiping his greasy fingers on my comforter like the absolute goblin of a human being he was, shaking his head like I was the one being unreasonable. "It's just a little get-together. I was gonna clean up." I actually felt my twitch. A little get-together? There were passed-out strangers in my living room, my stuff was destroyed, my entire apartment smelled like a frat house after a 3-day bender, and he had the absolute audacity to sit there, in my room, on my bed, acting like I was some kind of overdramatic tyrant for being furious about it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, trying not to lunge across the room and strangle him with my bare hands, trying to remember that I was a rational adult who solved problems with logic, not violence. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously calm, the kind of calm that usually came right before absolute destruction. "You threw a party in my home while I was at work, you let a bunch of random people in here without asking, you trashed my apartment, you broke my stuff, and now, when I call you out on it, you're seriously sitting there telling me to chill out?" Kyle just sighed, tossing the pizza crust onto my nightstand like a complete and utter menace, stretching his arms over his head with all the grace of a lazy house cat who had never known real consequences in his entire life. "You're being so dramatic," he muttered, shaking his head, completely unfazed by the fact that I was seconds away from unleashing an unholy level of wrath upon him. And that was it. That was the exact moment I knew Kyle had to go. Not next week. Not next month. Not when he finally got his non-existent life together. Now, without another word, I turned on my heel, grabbed my phone, and walked into my room, locking the door behind me, my hands still shaking with adrenaline, my mind racing with one single, crystal-clear thought: this is war. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't let another ounce of guilt or obligation stop me from doing what I should have done months ago. I pulled up my contacts, scrolled down to the number I had saved but never thought I'd actually need, and pressed call. The phone barely rang twice before someone picked up, their voice professional, direct, no nonsense. "Locksmith Services. How can I help you?" I took a slow breath, steadying my voice, feeling something darkly satisfying settle into my chest as I let my lips curl into the smallest, most victorious smile. "Yes," I said smoothly, glancing toward the door, already imagining Kyle's face when he came home the next day and realized what I had done. "I need to change the locks." Kyle had spent 6 months turning my home into his personal crash pad, 6 months lying, manipulating, and guilt-tripping me into letting him stay rent-free while he contributed absolutely nothing. 6 months pushing every possible boundary until I felt like a guest in my own damn apartment. But that was over now, because while Kyle had been blissfully unaware, lounging on my couch and eating my food, I had been quietly planning my revenge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came the next morning, when Kyle did something he rarely ever did. He actually left the apartment. It was almost too perfect. He had somehow managed to land a part-time gig at a warehouse, one of those low-effort jobs where he could show up late, do the bare minimum, and still get paid just enough to avoid getting fired, which meant that for the first time in months, he actually had somewhere to be. I watched from the kitchen as he groggily stumbled around, grabbing his hoodie, sliding into his sneakers, completely oblivious to the fact that this would be the last time he ever walked out of my apartment as a resident. Later, "Jess," he called over his shoulder as he grabbed his keys, not even waiting for a response, not even acknowledging how miserable he had made my life for the past half year, not even considering that I might have finally had enough of his crap. I didn't respond. I just stood there, watching the door swing shut behind him, listening for the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway, waiting until I was absolutely sure he was gone before I set my plan into motion. I already had everything lined up, every detail mapped out, every step carefully planned to ensure that by the time Kyle got back, his freeloading days would be officially over. The first call I made was to the locksmith, who showed up exactly on time, a no-nonsense older guy who barely batted an eye when I told him I needed the locks changed immediately. He worked fast, moving with practiced efficiency as he swapped out the deadbolt and handed me the new keys, nodding approvingly as I tested the lock to make sure it worked. "Bad tenant?" he asked, glancing at the pile of garbage bags I had already started filling with Kyle's things, the sheer amount of junk a perfect representation of just how much he had taken over my space. I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head as I tossed another one of Kyle's ratty hoodies into a bag. "Worse," I muttered, "an entitled little brother who thinks I'm his personal maid and landlord." The locksmith let out a low whistle, shaking his head as he gathered his tools. "Well," he said with a small smirk, "he's in for one hell of a surprise when he gets home." That was the idea. Once the locks were changed, I moved on to the second part of my plan, getting all of Kyle's stuff out of my apartment. It was disgusting how much junk he had managed to accumulate in 6 months, how many of my things he had claimed as his own, how many dirty clothes, half-empty food containers, and random pieces of garbage were scattered across my once clean apartment. I didn't even bother sorting through it. I just grabbed everything that was his, stuffed it into black garbage bags, and dragged it all outside the front door, piling it against the wall like a heap of unwanted donations. By the time I was done, all traces of Kyle had been erased from my home, the apartment looking cleaner, brighter, more peaceful than it had in months. But I wasn't done yet. I grabbed a sticky note, pressed it against the door at eye level, and wrote the last words Kyle would ever read as a resident of my home: "Time's up." Then, with one final, satisfied glance at my work, I pulled out my phone, blocked Kyle's number, and finally, for the first time in 6 months, sat back and enjoyed the feeling of knowing that I was free. Now, all that was left was to wait. And I didn't have to wait long. I knew exactly when Kyle's shift ended, knew exactly how long it would take him to get home, knew precisely when he would return to the apartment expecting everything to be the same, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to collapse in real time. So when I heard the angry, frantic pounding on my front door, when I heard his muffled, furious voice shouting my name, when I heard the unmistakable sound of plastic bags rustling as he realized all of his stuff was sitting outside, I couldn't help but smile. I didn't move from the couch. I didn't get up. I just sat there, letting the sounds of Kyle's utter disbelief and blind panic wash over me, sipping my tea as I finally felt what it was like to have my home all to myself again. Checkmate. The pounding on the door didn't stop, not even for a second, the sharp, angry rhythm of Kyle's fists slamming against the wood vibrating through the apartment like a drumbeat of pure rage. His voice, raw with frustration, carried through the thin walls, his words muffled but unmistakably furious, a string of curses and demands tumbling over each other as he tried, and failed, to process what had just happened. "Jessica, open the damn door right now. This isn't funny. What the hell is wrong with you?" I sat on the couch, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, my heartbeat steady, my breathing slow, my entire body wrapped in a calmness I hadn't felt in months. I didn't flinch when he screamed my name, didn't react when he kicked the door, didn't so much as blink when he let out a loud, frustrated yell, the kind that used to work on me, the kind that always made me cave, the kind that used to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. But not anymore. Because for the first time in 6 miserable months, I was in control. Kyle pounded on the door again, his voice growing more desperate, more pleading, more pathetic, the fight in him starting to fade into something else, something weaker, something realer, something that told me he finally understood that this time, there was no getting out of it. Jess, come on. He shouted, the anger cracking, the bravado slipping, the raw, unfiltered panic creeping into his voice like he had only just realized that this was real, that I had actually followed through, that his easy, carefree, freeloading existence had officially come to an end. Can we just talk? You didn't have to do this, Jesus. You didn't have to throw my stuff outside like I'm some kind of stranger. I set my mug down, stood up slowly, stretched my arms above my head, and walked toward the door, not in a rush, not feeling any of the anxiety that used to grip me whenever Kyle threw one of his fits, not carrying even an ounce of the guilt he had spent months trying to make me feel. I reached for the lock, hesitated for a second, not because I was second-guessing myself, but because I wanted to savor this moment, to truly enjoy the sound of Kyle realizing that he had finally lost, then slowly unlocked the deadbolt. Just enough to open the door half an inch, not enough for him to push his way in, but just enough for me to see his face, red with frustration, his eyes darting past me as if he could somehow will his way back into the apartment if he just looked hard enough. His entire body tensed when he saw me standing there, his mouth opening like he was about to launch into some poorly rehearsed excuse, some manipulative sob story, some half-hearted attempt to flip this around on me. But I was already one step ahead of him, already prepared for every possible angle he was about to take, already fully aware that this conversation was going to end with him walking away with nothing. You had 6 months, I said, my voice calm, my tone even, my expression completely unreadable. 6 months to figure something out. 6 months to get a job. 6 months to pay a single bill. 6 months to respect my home. 6 months to act like a real adult. And you did absolutely nothing. Kyle blinked, thrown off by my lack of emotion, his usual tactics falling flat against the brick wall of my indifference. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and tried again, this time switching gears, his voice dropping into something softer, something familiar, something designed to manipulate me the way it always had before. Jess, I'm your brother, he said, forcing out a laugh, shaking his head like he was trying to make me remember something I had never actually forgotten, like he was hoping that the word family would still hold the same power it used to. I mean, seriously, what am I supposed to do now? You really think this is fair? Fair. The word nearly made me laugh out loud. I tilted my head, studied him for a long moment, let him squirm under my silence, let him feel the weight of the reality he had spent 6 months ignoring. And then, just as I saw the first flicker of real panic settle into his expression, I dropped the final bombshell, the one he never saw coming, the one that would shatter whatever last bit of control he thought he still had. I already called Mom, I said, watching as his face completely fell, as his mouth opened, then snapped shut, as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. I told her everything. The freeloading, the excuses, the partying, the fact that you had no intention of ever leaving. And guess what, Kyle? I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make sure he heard every single syllable, just enough to make sure the truth dug in deep, just enough to make sure he understood that there was nowhere left for him to run. She said you're not staying with her, either. His eyes widened, his shoulders stiffened, his entire body locked up like a man who had just realized he was completely and utterly screwed. She what? He stammered, the words barely forming, his confidence crumbling before my eyes, his hands twitching at his sides like he was trying to process the fact that his last safety net had just been ripped away. Yeah, I said, nodding slowly, savoring the way his breath hitched, the way the panic finally set in, the way he finally understood that he was out of options. She said it was about time you figured it out on your own. Kyle's mouth opened like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to say something that would make me take it all back, like he was trying to grab at the last shreds of control he had left. But there was nothing left to say, nothing he could do, no last-minute trick that could undo what had already been set in motion. He had finally, completely, and entirely lost. I stepped back, gripped the edge of the door, and gave him one last look, one final moment to truly understand what had just happened, one last second to realize that he had done this to himself. Then, without another word, I shut the door in his face, locked it, and walked away. As I sat back down, the apartment silent for the first time in 6 long, exhausting months, I let out a slow, deep breath, feeling the weight of every single moment of frustration, every ounce of stress, every lingering trace of resentment finally disappear. Kyle had spent months taking everything from me, but in the end, I had taken the one thing he valued the most, his ability to get away with it. And as I glanced out the window, watching as he slouched down onto the curb, his head in his hands, his entire posture defeated in a way I had never seen before, I finally felt free.